The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her modest Honda Civic. She wore a simple gray tracksuit and running shoes, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. To anyone watching, she looked like any other 35-year-old woman heading out for her morning jog. No one would have guessed that beneath this ordinary appearance was one of the most decorated naval commanders in American military history. Sarah had specifically chosen this small town in Virginia for her brief leave. After 18 months of classified operations that had taken her to the most dangerous corners of the world, she craved anonymity. She wanted to walk into a coffee shop without being saluted, to buy groceries without discussing mission parameters, to simply exist as Sarah the person rather than Commander Mitchell, who led the Navy's most elite SEAL teams. The coffee shop on Main Street was exactly what she had hoped for: warm, inviting, with a gentle hum of local conversation. Sarah ordered a simple black coffee and found a corner table near the window. She pulled out a worn paperback novel, one of the few luxuries she allowed herself during deployments. For the first time in months, she felt her shoulders relax. "Excuse me, miss," a voice interrupted her reading. Sarah looked up to see Officer James Hendricks, a young police officer with earnest eyes and a nervous demeanor. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Sarah blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" Officer Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. "We've received reports of someone impersonating military personnel in the area. Someone matching your description was seen at the base entrance yesterday, claiming to be a high-ranking officer." A cold realization washed over Sarah. Yesterday, she had indeed visited the local naval facility to check in with her liaison officer, a routine requirement even during leave. She had worn civilian clothes then, too, as was her preference when not on active duty. Someone must have seen her presenting her credentials and misunderstood the situation. "Officer, I can't explain," Sarah began calmly, reaching for her wallet. "I'm military personnel. I'm Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I was legitimately visiting the base yesterday on official business." Hendricks examined her military ID with obvious skepticism. "Ma'am, this ID looks authentic, but we've had sophisticated fakes before." The person who called in the report was very specific. They said someone was pretending to be some kind of special operations commander. They seemed pretty certain it was fraudulent. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same one she experienced when missions went sideways and required careful navigation. "Officer Hendricks," she said, reading his name tag, "I understand your caution, but I assure you my credentials are genuine. If you need verification, you can contact the Pentagon directly." "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the station," Hendricks said, his voice taking on an official tone. "We need to sort this out properly. There are serious penalties for impersonating military personnel." The coffee shop had grown quiet. Sarah became acutely aware of the stares from other patrons, their conversations dying as they watched the scene unfold. She saw an elderly man shake his head disapprovingly, probably assuming she was indeed an imposter. A young mother pulled her child closer, as if Sarah posed some kind of threat. This was exactly the kind of attention Sarah had come here to avoid. But more than personal embarrassment, she felt a deep sadness at the misunderstanding. Here she was, having spent the better part of 2 decades serving her country, often in ways she could never publicly discuss, and she was being treated as a criminal. "Of course, officer," Sarah said quietly, closing her book and standing up. "I'll cooperate fully." As they walked toward the patrol car, Sarah caught glimpses of people pulling out their phones to record the scene. By evening, she realized this would probably be all over social media. Military imposter arrested at local coffee shop. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had faced down international terrorists and hostile governments, had made split-second decisions that saved countless lives, yet here she was being led away in handcuffs because someone doubted a woman could hold her position. The police station was small and outdated, clearly serving a community where the most serious crimes were probably speeding tickets and the occasional domestic disturbance. Officer Hendricks was professional, but clearly out of his depth. He had probably never dealt with anything like this before. "I need to ask you to empty your pockets, ma'am," Hendricks said as they entered the booking area. Sarah complied, placing her wallet, keys, and phone on the counter. Among her belongings was a small, seemingly insignificant black card, her classified access credential. Hendricks examined it briefly, but clearly didn't recognize its significance. "What's this card for?" he asked. "It's a security clearance credential," Sarah explained. "It's for accessing certain government facilities." Hendricks looked even more skeptical. "These can be fake too, you know. We see fake government IDs all the time." Sarah nodded patiently. She understood his position, even if it was frustrating. From his perspective, he was doing his job, protecting the community from someone who might be committing a federal crime. She respected that, even as she sat in a holding cell waiting for the situation to be resolved. The holding cell was sparse, just a bench and a sink. Sarah sat quietly, her mind automatically shifting into the calm, analytical mode that had served her well in countless high-pressure situations. She began mentally reviewing the steps needed to resolve this misunderstanding while minimizing damage to both her own privacy and the young officer's career. Hours passed. Sarah could hear Hendricks making phone calls, his voice growing increasingly frustrated as he apparently encountered bureaucratic obstacles in verifying her identity. The military security protocols, designed to protect personnel like her, were now working against her in this civilian context. "Ma'am," Hendricks appeared at the cell door, looking more uncertain than before. "I've been trying to verify your identity through normal channels, but I keep getting transferred around. Some offices won't even confirm or deny that you exist in their system." Sarah understood immediately. Her work with the SEALs often required operational security measures that made standard verification difficult. Her personnel records were compartmentalized, accessible only to those with specific clearances and need-to-know authorization. "Officer Hendricks," she said gently, "may I suggest calling the Pentagon's main switchboard and asking for the Office of Naval Intelligence Duty Officer? Tell them you need verification for a classified personnel matter involving Commander Sarah Mitchell. They'll know how to handle it." Hendricks looked at her with a mixture of confusion and growing respect. Her calm demeanor and specific knowledge were beginning to create doubt about his initial assumptions. "How do you know so much about military bureaucracy if you're not really military?" he asked. Sarah smiled sadly. "Because I've spent more than half my adult life navigating it." "Officer, I'm not angry with you for doing your job. You're protecting your community from potential fraud, and that's commendable. But I'm who I say I am." As evening approached, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken. Just 48 hours ago, she had been briefing Pentagon officials on a successful counterterrorism operation in Southeast Asia. Tomorrow, she was supposed to be selecting and training the next generation of SEAL recruits. Instead, she was sitting in a small-town jail cell, her identity in question. The irony was profound. She had spent years proving herself in a male-dominated field, earning respect through performance and dedication. She had led men and women into situations where failure meant death, had made decisions that affected national security, had sacrificed personal relationships for the sake of service. Yet here, in this quiet town where she had sought nothing more than a peaceful cup of coffee, her most basic claim to identity was being questioned. Officer Hendricks returned, his expression now showing signs of genuine concern. "Ma'am, I've been trying for hours, but the military bureaucracy is complicated. They keep asking me questions I don't know how to answer. Some of them want me to provide clearance levels and codes I've never heard of." Sarah could see the doubt creeping into his voice. "Officer, what if I told you that there's someone who can verify my identity immediately, but reaching them might require going through channels you're not familiar with?" "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I mean that my position requires such a high level of security clearance that normal verification procedures don't apply. The people who can confirm my identity operate at classification levels that most law enforcement never encounters." Hendricks sat down across from her cell, his official demeanor softening slightly. "Ma'am, I have to ask, if you really are who you say you are, how did you end up in a place like this? I mean, why would a high-ranking military officer be alone in a small town, dressed like a civilian?" For the first time since this ordeal began, Sarah felt a genuine smile cross her face. Because sometimes, Officer Hendricks, even people with extraordinary jobs, need ordinary moments. "I came here because I wanted to be anonymous for a few days. I wanted to drink coffee and read a book without anyone knowing or caring about my rank or my job." Ironic, isn't it? The young officer studied her face carefully. "You know, my grandfather was in Korea. He always said you could tell real military people by how they carried themselves. Even out of uniform, there was something different about them." Sarah nodded. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. He used to say that the most dangerous people were often the quietest ones, the ones who didn't need to prove anything to anybody." Hendricks paused, then looked directly at her. "You've been here for hours, and you haven't once raised your voice or demanded special treatment. That's unusual. Getting angry rarely solves problems, officer. And everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of the circumstances." As the day faded into evening, Sarah found herself in an unexpected conversation with her captor. Hendricks began sharing stories about his grandfather's military service, while Sarah listened with genuine interest. She could see in the young man's eyes the same sense of duty and honor that motivated her own service, just applied in a different context. The situation was far from resolved, but something had shifted. The mutual suspicion was giving way to mutual respect, even as the fundamental misunderstanding remained. Sarah realized that this experience, frustrating as it was, offered her something she rarely encountered in her high-security world: the chance to connect with someone as simply one human being to another. Outside the small police station, the town was settling into its evening routine. Families were gathering for dinner, students were finishing homework, and the ordinary rhythm of small-town life continued, unaware that in their modest jail cell sat a woman whose decisions had shaped international events and whose leadership had saved American lives around the world. But, for now, Commander Sarah Mitchell was simply Sarah, a woman waiting for the truth to emerge from the bureaucratic maze that both protected and confined her. The real test of her character wasn't happening in some distant combat zone. It was happening right here, in how she chose to handle this moment of profound misunderstanding with grace, patience, and humanity. Dawn was breaking over the small town when Officer Hendricks finally received the call that would transform everything. Sarah had dozed fitfully on the narrow bench, her mind still alert despite her exhaustion. She had learned long ago to rest, when possible, while maintaining readiness for action, a skill that served her well in both combat zones and, apparently, small-town jail cells. The phone rang sharply in the quiet station, and Sarah heard Hendricks answer with his usual professional greeting. But within moments, his tone changed dramatically. "Yes, sir. Yes, I understand, sir. No, sir, she's been treated respectfully, sir. May I ask who I'm speaking with?" Sarah sat up, recognizing the subtle shift in the young officer's voice. Someone with authority was on the other end of that call. "Admiral Peterson?" Hendricks's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, yes, sir, she's here." "No, sir, no charges have been filed yet. We were trying to verify." Admiral Peterson. Sarah knew him well. He was her direct superior and one of the few people in the Pentagon who knew the full scope of her recent missions. If he was calling personally, it meant someone had finally connected the dots and realized that the military imposter in custody was actually one of the Navy's most valuable assets. Hendricks appeared at her cell door, his face pale with a mixture of embarrassment and dawning horror. Behind him stood Chief Williams, the older officer who supervised the night shift and who had just arrived for the morning briefing. "Ma'am," Hendricks began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to ask you, are you the Commander Mitchell who led Operation Neptune's Shield?" Sarah's heart skipped. Operation Neptune's Shield was classified at the highest levels. The fact that Hendricks knew the name meant that someone very high up the chain of command had broken protocol to verify her identity. I can neither confirm nor deny involvement in any classified operations, officer, Sarah replied carefully, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. Chief Williams stepped forward, his weathered face grave with understanding. Son, he said to Hendricks, I think we may have made a significant error here. The next few minutes were a blur of unlocking doors, profuse apologies, and frantic attempts by the local police to undo what they now realized was a catastrophic misunderstanding. But Sarah's attention was focused on the phone call she needed to make, not to complain or seek retribution, but to contain the damage this incident might cause to ongoing operations. I need to contact my command immediately, Sarah told Chief Williams. There are time-sensitive matters that require my attention. Within an hour, the small police station had transformed into something resembling a military command post. Sarah had been given access to a secure line, and her phone calls were bringing reality crashing down on the quiet town like a tidal wave. The first call was to Admiral Peterson himself. Admiral, I apologize for the disruption. I can be back in Washington within 6 hours if needed. Negative, Sarah, came the Admiral's gravelly voice through the encrypted line. But we have a situation developing. The Chinese submarine we've been tracking has changed course. Intel suggests they're moving toward the disputed waters near Taiwan. I need you back here for an emergency briefing. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with crisis situations. Understood, sir. What's our timeline? 48 hours maximum. We're looking at a potential international incident, and the president wants options on his desk. Your team is the only unit with the specific training for this type of intervention. As Sarah ended the call, she became aware that both Chief Williams and Officer Hendricks had been listening, their faces reflecting growing comprehension of who they had been holding in their jail cell. Ma'am, Chief Williams said quietly, I owe you an apology that I don't think words can adequately express. Sarah turned to face the two men, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she allowed her military bearing to show fully. The transformation was startling. The quiet woman in the tracksuit was gone, replaced by a figure of unmistakable authority and competence. Chief Williams, Officer Hendricks, she said, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, you were doing your jobs. You had a report of potential fraud, and you investigated it properly. I hold no grudge against either of you. But Hendricks looked devastated. Ma'am, we had you in handcuffs. We treated you like a criminal. How can you not be angry? Sarah studied the young officer's face, seeing in it the same dedication to service that had driven her own career. Officer Hendricks, may I ask why you joined the police force? The question seemed to surprise him. To serve my community, ma'am. To protect people and uphold the law. And that's exactly what you did yesterday, Sarah replied. You saw what you believed was a crime, and you acted to protect your community from fraud. The fact that this was a misunderstanding doesn't diminish the nobility of your motives. The phone rang again, and this time Chief Williams answered. After a brief conversation, he turned to Sarah with an expression of bewilderment. Ma'am, that was the governor's office. Apparently, there's going to be a helicopter landing at the high school football field in 30 minutes to transport you to Washington. They're asking us to provide an escort. Sarah nodded as if military helicopters landing in small towns was a perfectly normal occurrence. That would be appreciated, Chief. As they prepared to leave the station, Hendricks approached Sarah hesitantly. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Yesterday, when I arrested you, you could have told me about your security clearance, about your position, about any of this. Why didn't you? Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. Because, Officer Hendricks, the moment I start using my position to avoid consequences or demand special treatment is the moment I become unworthy of that position. Everyone deserves to be treated equally under the law, whether they're a grocery clerk or a general. The wisdom in her words wasn't lost on either officer. Here was a woman who wielded enormous power and responsibility, yet had chosen to endure injustice rather than abuse her authority. The ride to the high school was surreal. Sarah sat in the back of the patrol car, now as an honored guest rather than a prisoner, watching the familiar suburban streets pass by. The irony of the situation struck her. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been seeking anonymity in this quiet town. Now, her departure would likely be witnessed by half the community. The helicopter was already waiting when they arrived, its rotors spinning lazily in the morning air. Sarah recognized the aircraft, a VH-60 White Hawk, typically used for high-priority Pentagon transport. The presence of such an aircraft in this small town would fuel speculation for years to come. Before boarding, Sarah turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. Word had spread quickly through the town about the morning's events, and curious residents had come to witness the spectacle of a military helicopter landing at their local high school. "Officer Hendricks," Sarah said, extending her hand, "it's been an honor to meet you. Continue serving your community with the same dedication you showed yesterday." The young officer shook her hand, still looking somewhat stunned by the morning's revelations. "Ma'am, I just want you to know, if there's ever anything I can do." Sarah smiled. "There is actually keeping the kind of officer who investigates potential crimes thoroughly and treats everyone with respect, regardless of who they might be. That's the kind of law enforcement our country needs." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the small town that had become an unexpected chapter in her life. She could see people pointing up at the aircraft, probably wondering what kind of person required such dramatic transportation. They would never know that the quiet woman who had been arrested in their coffee shop was about to participate in decisions that could prevent an international conflict. The flight to Washington gave Sarah time to transition mentally from the surreal experience of the past day to the critical mission ahead. Her phone buzzed with encrypted messages updating her on the developing situation in the South China Sea. A Chinese submarine had indeed changed course and was moving toward waters claimed by Taiwan. Intelligence suggested this might be a test of American resolve, a probe to see how the new administration would respond to provocative actions. Sarah's SEAL team was uniquely qualified for this type of mission. They had spent months training for underwater operations in contested waters, and their last 3 deployments had all involved submarine interdiction. If diplomatic solutions failed, they would likely be called upon to conduct a covert operation that could either prevent a crisis or trigger a larger conflict. As the helicopter approached the Pentagon, Sarah could see the controlled chaos that surrounded major military operations. Additional security personnel were visible, and the usual traffic patterns had been altered to accommodate increased activity. Whatever was developing in the Pacific, it was being treated as a potential turning point in regional stability. The landing at the Pentagon's helipad was routine for Sarah, but she couldn't help thinking about the contrast with her departure from the small town. Here, her arrival was expected and prepared for. Security personnel snapped to attention, communications were seamlessly coordinated, and every detail was planned and executed with military precision. But as she walked toward the Pentagon's main entrance, Sarah carried with her something unexpected from her time in detention, a renewed appreciation for the ordinary courage of people like Officer Hendricks. While she was preparing for missions that would never be publicly acknowledged, he would return to his patrol car and continue protecting his community with the same quiet dedication that had led to their memorable encounter. The small-town police officer and the elite SEAL commander had different roles, but Sarah now understood they served the same fundamental purpose: protecting others, upholding justice, and maintaining the security that allowed ordinary life to continue peacefully. The misunderstanding that had brought them together had revealed something important about the nature of service itself. As she entered the Pentagon for what would likely be one of the most critical briefings of her career, Sarah Mitchell carried with her not just the weight of national security responsibilities, but also a deeper understanding of the common thread that connected all those who chose to serve others, whether in small towns or on the world stage. The Pentagon briefing room was filled with the controlled tension that Sarah knew all too well. Maps of the South China Sea dominated the walls, marked with red symbols indicating Chinese naval positions and blue ones showing American assets. Admiral Peterson stood at the head of the polished conference table, his expression grave as he addressed the assembled officers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at a potential flashpoint that could reshape the entire Pacific balance of power, Peterson began. The Chinese submarine Changzheng 18 has penetrated what Taiwan considers its territorial waters. Beijing claims this is a routine patrol, but our intelligence suggests otherwise. Sarah studied the tactical displays with a focused intensity that had made her one of the Navy's most trusted commanders. The Chinese submarine's position was strategically significant, close enough to Taiwanese ports to gather intelligence, but in waters disputed enough that their presence could be defended diplomatically. "What's the submarine's apparent mission profile, Admiral?" asked Captain Roberts, the senior intelligence officer. "Unknown, but their behavior pattern suggests either intelligence gathering or positioning for a potential blockade scenario. Either way, the Taiwanese government has requested our assistance in monitoring the situation." Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. As she read it, her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The message was from her team leader in California. "Team assembled and ready. Awaiting your orders." These men and women had been pulled from various assignments across the country, probably told only that their commander needed them for an urgent classified mission. They would be preparing equipment, reviewing contingency plans, and mentally shifting into the operational mindset that had made them the most elite fighting force in the American military. "Commander Mitchell," Admiral Peterson's voice brought her attention back to the briefing. "I'm assigning you as operational lead for any direct action requirements. Your team has the specific training and experience we need for this type of mission." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight being placed on her shoulders. "What are the rules of engagement, Admiral?" "That's still being determined at the highest levels. The President is meeting with the National Security Council this afternoon. What I need from you is a range of options from passive monitoring to active intervention." As the briefing continued, Sarah's mind was already working through the tactical challenges. Submarine operations in contested waters required not just military skill, but also an understanding of international law, diplomatic consequences, and the delicate balance between showing strength and avoiding escalation. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made her pause. "Commander, this is Officer Hendricks from yesterday. I saw the news about tensions in the Pacific. I don't know what you're involved in, but I wanted you to know that my grandfather's unit motto was courage in the shadows. Thought you might appreciate that. Stay safe." The message was simultaneously touching and sobering. Here was a young police officer who had no idea about the specifics of her mission, but who understood enough to offer support. It reminded Sarah of why her work mattered. Not for the headlines or recognition, which would never come, but for the ordinary people like Hendricks who went about their daily lives trusting that others were protecting them from threats they would never know existed. After the briefing, Sarah found herself in Admiral Peterson's private office, discussing the mission parameters in greater detail. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer," Peterson said, closing the door behind them. "How are you feeling about command responsibility right now? Yesterday's incident with the local police suggests you might be dealing with some stress about public recognition of your role." Sarah considered the question carefully. Peterson was one of the few people in the military who knew her well enough to read between the lines of yesterday's events. "Admiral, yesterday I was arrested because someone couldn't believe a woman in civilian clothes could hold my position. Tomorrow I might be leading a mission that could prevent or trigger an international conflict. The contrast isn't lost on me." "That's not what I asked, Sarah." She met his eyes directly. "I'm ready for this mission, Admiral. More ready than I've ever been. Actually, yesterday reminded me of something important about why we do this job." Peterson raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. "We don't serve for recognition or public acknowledgement. We serve for people like Officer Hendricks, decent people trying to do their jobs and protect their communities. The fact that they don't know what we do, or sometimes don't believe we can do it, doesn't diminish its importance." The Admiral smiled slightly. "That's the answer I needed to hear, because what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room." Sarah straightened, recognizing the tone that preceded the most sensitive intelligence briefings. The Chinese submarine isn't just gathering intelligence. Sarah, our assets suggest they're testing a new type of underwater drone, something that could potentially lay mines or conduct sabotage operations without risking a manned vessel. If they succeed in this test, it changes the entire strategic balance in the region. The implications hit Sarah immediately. This wasn't just about territorial disputes or diplomatic posturing. The Chinese might be developing technology that could blockade Taiwan or other American allies without technically committing an act of war with a manned vessel. What's the timeline for intervention, Admiral? 48 hours maximum. After that, they'll be in international waters where we have no legal basis for action. But, Sarah, here's the critical part. This mission cannot go wrong. If we're detected, if we create an international incident, if anything goes public, it could justify exactly the kind of aggressive response from Beijing that we're trying to prevent. Sarah felt the familiar weight of command settling over her like a heavy cloak. Every mission carried risks, but this one carried the additional burden of potential global consequences. Her decisions in the coming days wouldn't just affect her team or even American interests. They could influence the stability of the entire Pacific region. Understand, Admiral. My team will be ready. As she left Peterson's office, Sarah's phone was already buzzing with messages from her team leaders. Word had filtered down through classified channels that they were preparing for immediate deployment. Equipment was being loaded, transportation arranged, and contingency plans activated. But first, she had to make a call that had nothing to do with military operations. Officer Hendricks, this is Commander Mitchell. I wanted to thank you for your message. Ma'am, I hope I wasn't overstepping. The news about China and Taiwan has everyone worried, and I figured someone in your position might be involved somehow. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of her situation. You weren't overstepping at all, and I wanted you to know that your grandfather's motto, courage in the shadows, is going to mean a lot to me in the coming days. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Of course. Yesterday, when I arrested you, you stayed so calm. Even when people were staring and taking pictures, even when it must have been humiliating, you never lost your composure. How do you do that? Sarah paused, watching the sunset through her Pentagon office window. Officer Hendricks, in my line of work, you learn that the most important battles are often the ones nobody ever hears about. Yesterday was just practice for staying calm when everything is on the line, but nobody understands what's at stake. That evening, as Sarah packed her gear for what could be a career-defining mission, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. Less than 48 hours ago, she had been a woman seeking anonymity in a small-town coffee shop. Now she was preparing to lead a mission that could influence the course of international relations for years to come. Her team arrived at the staging area that night, 12 of the most highly trained operators in the American military, men and women who had served together through countless missions, who trusted each other with their lives, and who had chosen to follow her leadership into some of the most dangerous situations imaginable. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, her senior enlisted advisor, approached her as she reviewed the mission files. Commander, the team is ready. Equipment check is complete, transport is standing by, and everyone understands this is a no-fail mission. Sarah looked at the faces around her, some young, some weathered by years of combat, all united by their commitment to excellence and their trust in her leadership. These were people who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments the military could offer, who had trained relentlessly for situations exactly like this one. Rodriguez, I want you to know that I've never been more confident in a team's ability to accomplish the mission. Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, you seem different tonight. More focused than usual, if that's possible. Sarah considered his observation. Yesterday, I was reminded why we do this job, Master Chief. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help you remember what's really important. As the team conducted their final briefings, Sarah thought about Officer Hendricks, probably finishing his evening patrol in the quiet town where this extraordinary journey had begun. He would go home to his family, secure in the knowledge that he had served his community well that day. He would never know that the woman he had arrested was about to risk her life to protect his peaceful way of life. The transport helicopter arrived at midnight, its rotors cutting through the darkness as Sarah and her team prepared for insertion into what could become one of the most critical missions in recent military history. As they lifted off into the night sky, Sarah carried with her not just the tactical plans and operational requirements, but also a renewed understanding of the sacred trust between those who serve in the shadows and those they protect in the light. The mission ahead would test every skill she had developed over 2 decades of military service. But more than that, it would test her ability to carry the weight of command with the same grace and humility she had shown in a small-town jail cell, when the stakes were personal embarrassment rather than international stability. As the helicopter disappeared into the darkness, heading toward a rendezvous with destiny in the contested waters of the South China Sea, Sarah Mitchell prepared to prove once again that the most dangerous people are often the quietest ones, the ones who don't need to prove anything to anybody, but who will risk everything to protect others. The USS Columbia cut through the dark waters of the Pacific like a silent predator, its nuclear-powered engines propelling the submarine and its precious cargo toward the contested waters where diplomacy had failed and military precision would determine the future of international relations. Sarah stood in the control room, studying the sonar displays that showed the Chinese submarine Chang'an, 18 maintaining its position in what Taiwan considered territorial waters. Contact bearing 270, range 12,000 yards, reported sonar technician First Class Williams. Chinese submarine is holding steady, but we're detecting unusual acoustic signatures. Sarah moved to the sonar station, her trained ear picking up the subtle variations in the underwater soundscape that told the story of what was happening below the surface. The acoustic signatures Williams mentioned were indeed unusual, consistent with the deployment of small underwater drones, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Master Chief Rodriguez, she said quietly, initiate final equipment checks. We insert in 30 minutes. The past week had been a masterclass in precision and patience. Sarah's team had spent days studying every detail of the Chinese submarine's operations, learning its patrol patterns, understanding its capabilities, and preparing for the most delicate underwater operation any of them had ever attempted. They weren't going to attack the submarine. That would risk the international incident everyone was trying to avoid. Instead, they were going to do something far more difficult. They were going to prove what the Chinese were really doing without being detected. Commander, Captain Morrison, the Columbia's commanding officer, approached her with a secure communication device. Flash traffic from the Pentagon. The president has approved the mission, but he's emphasizing the political sensitivities. Quote, get the proof we need, but if this goes sideways, it never happened. End quote. Sarah nodded grimly. She understood the implications perfectly. If her team succeeded in documenting the Chinese drone deployment, it would provide crucial intelligence and potentially prevent future provocations. If they were caught or detected, the diplomatic fallout could escalate into exactly the kind of conflict everyone was trying to avoid. Her secure phone buzzed with a message that seemed surreal in the context of the high-stakes underwater operation. Commander, this is Chief Williams from the police department. Officer Hendricks wanted me to pass along a message. He said his grandfather always told him that the best warriors are the ones who win without anyone knowing there was a fight. Thought you might appreciate that wisdom. Sarah smiled despite the tension. The small-town police chief had no idea how perfectly his message captured the essence of her current mission. If she did her job correctly, the world would never know this operation had taken place. Success would be measured not in headlines or commendations, but in conflicts that never materialized and crises that were quietly resolved. Team leader to all units, she spoke into her communication headset. Final mission brief in the torpedo room in 5 minutes. As her 12-person team assembled in the cramped space between the submarine's torpedo tubes, Sarah looked at each face, knowing that these men and women represented the absolute pinnacle of military training and dedication. They had volunteered for a mission that could easily result in death or international imprisonment, and they had done so without hesitation because they trusted her leadership. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "in 15 minutes we're going to conduct the most sensitive underwater reconnaissance mission in recent Navy history. Our objective is to document and, if possible, retrieve one of the Chinese underwater drones without alerting their submarine to our presence." Petty Officer Chun, their electronics specialist, raised her hand. "Commander, what's our contingency if we're detected?" Sarah had been dreading this question because the honest answer was one that no commander wanted to give. If we're detected, our mission becomes survival and extraction. Under no circumstances can we allow ourselves to be captured with evidence of this operation. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight. Everyone in the room understood what she was saying without her having to spell it out explicitly. "However," Sarah continued, "I have absolute confidence in this team's ability to complete this mission successfully and invisibly. We've trained for scenarios exactly like this one, and we have advantages the Chinese don't know about." Those advantages included new underwater propulsion systems that produced virtually no acoustic signature, specially designed cameras that could function in complete darkness, and communication equipment that used quantum encryption to prevent interception. But their greatest advantage was the collective experience and skill of the team itself. 20 minutes later, Sarah and her team were in the water, descending through the black depths toward their target. The Chinese submarine was maintaining position 300 feet below the surface, its hull illuminated only by the faint bioluminescence of deep-sea organisms. Sarah could make out the distinctive silhouette of the Changzheng 18 and, more importantly, the small objects being deployed from its forward compartments. The Chinese drones were remarkable pieces of technology, about the size of torpedoes, but clearly designed for stealth and persistence rather than destruction. Through her underwater camera system, Sarah could see them moving with the fluid grace of mechanical sea creatures, their sensors sweeping the ocean floor in search patterns that suggested they were mapping underwater terrain and testing deployment procedures. "Team leader to base," she whispered into her underwater communication system. "Target confirmed. Drones are conducting what appears to be a comprehensive survey of potential choke point locations. This isn't a test. It's preparation for actual deployment." The intelligence implications were staggering. If the Chinese could position these drones at key locations around Taiwan and other strategic islands, they could effectively control shipping lanes without maintaining a visible military presence. The drones could remain dormant for months, activated only when needed to either gather intelligence or, in a crisis, disrupt maritime traffic. Sarah's team moved with the fluid coordination that came from years of training together. While two members documented the drone operations with specialized cameras, others collected water samples that would later reveal the electromagnetic signatures of the devices. Most importantly, Petty Officer Thompson was maneuvering into position to capture one of the smaller drones using a device that looked like a sophisticated underwater net. The operation required absolute silence and precision. The Chinese submarine sonar systems were among the most advanced in the world, capable of detecting the smallest deviation from normal ocean sounds. Sarah and her team had to work like underwater ghosts, present but invisible, gathering crucial intelligence without leaving any trace of their presence. "Commander," Thompson's voice came through her headset, "I have a clean approach on the target drone. Recommend capture in 30 seconds. Sarah's heart rate increased as the most critical moment of the mission approached. Capturing the drone would provide invaluable intelligence about Chinese underwater technology, but it also represented the greatest risk of detection. "All units, maintain absolute silence," she ordered. "Thompson, you are cleared for capture." The next 30 seconds felt like hours. Sarah watched through her night vision system as Thompson approached the Chinese drone with the careful precision of a surgeon. The capture device had been designed specifically for this type of mission, using magnetic fields rather than physical contact to secure the target without creating detectable vibrations. "Package secured," Thompson reported. "Drone is inactive, and contained. But their celebration was premature. The Chinese submarine's sonar array suddenly came to life, its active pings sweeping through the water in search patterns that suggested they had detected something unusual. All units, emergency evasion, Sarah ordered. Move to dispersal positions and maintain radio silence. The team scattered like a school of fish, each member following predetermined escape routes designed to confuse sonar tracking. Sarah found herself pressed against the rocky sea floor, her heart pounding as the Chinese submarine's sonar sweeps passed over her position repeatedly. For 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, the Chinese crew searched for whatever had triggered their detection systems. Sarah could hear the submarine's hull creaking as it maneuvered, trying to locate the source of the disturbance. Finally, the active sonar went silent, and the submarine returned to its previous position. All units, report status, Sarah whispered into her communication system. One by one, her team members confirmed they were safe and undetected. More importantly, Thompson still had possession of the captured drone, and the documentation team had successfully recorded several hours of Chinese operations. The extraction phase of the mission was as tense as the insertion had been. Sarah's team had to return to the USS Columbia without being detected, carrying with them intelligence that could reshape American understanding of Chinese underwater capabilities. As they surfaced inside the submarine's flooded torpedo room, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that followed successful covert operations. They had accomplished something that intelligence analysts had considered nearly impossible: gathering definitive proof of Chinese intentions without creating a diplomatic incident. "Commander," Captain Morrison greeted her as she emerged from the diving chamber, "Washington is asking for your preliminary assessment." Sarah pulled off her diving helmet and looked at the Chinese drone now secured in a specialized containment unit. "Captain, tell Washington that we have confirmation of a systematic Chinese effort to position underwater assets for potential control of Pacific shipping lanes. This isn't defensive posturing, it's preparation for offensive operations. The intelligence would be analyzed by teams of experts, shared with allies, and used to develop countermeasures against the Chinese underwater strategy." But for Sarah, the most important outcome was simpler. Her team had completed an impossible mission and returned home safely. Days later, as Sarah finally returned to the quiet Virginia town where this extraordinary journey had begun, she reflected on the strange symmetry of her experiences. She had been arrested as a suspected fraud in a coffee shop, had led a team through one of the most sensitive military operations in recent history, and was now back to seeking the same anonymity she had craved a week earlier. Her secure phone rang as she walked down the same main street where Officer Hendricks had first approached her. "Commander Mitchell, this is Officer Hendricks. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted you to know that Chief Williams got a call from the Pentagon. They said to express their appreciation for your patience with our department last week." Sarah smiled. "Officer Hendricks, your department conducted itself professionally throughout that incident. I hope I didn't cause too much excitement in your quiet town. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, did everything work out okay with whatever you were called away for?" Sarah paused, looking around at the peaceful street scene. Families walking together, children playing, ordinary people living ordinary lives in the safety and freedom that her mission had helped preserve. "Yes, Officer Hendricks. Everything worked out exactly as it should have." As she ended the call and continued her walk through the small town, Sarah understood that this would always be the paradox of her profession. The most important victories would never be celebrated, the greatest successes would remain classified, and the people she protected would never know how close they had come to danger. But that afternoon, walking through a quiet American town where a young police officer continued his patrol and families went about their daily lives in peace, Commander Sarah Mitchell knew that some victories were measured not in recognition, but in the preservation of ordinary moments like these. The woman who had been detained for impersonation had proven once again that the most dangerous people are indeed often the quietest ones. those who serve in shadows so that others can live in the light, those who risk everything while asking for nothing in return, and those who measure success not in personal glory, but in the safety and security of the communities they have sworn to protect. In the end, that was the only recognition that truly mattered.